Now, what am I going to show as, how do I show as the
Wait, all right, settle down,
here?
settle down. All right, my name's Ken Stano with YouTube channel History X. Thank you for logging on tonight with us. We got another live broadcast like usual, crossover broadcast, 3 YouTube channels, along with the Popular Museum Ships Facebook group. So tonight it is Destroyer versus Submarine, one of my favorite subjects from World War II when it comes to the Battle of Atlantic. We're going to tell you a story tonight where a pretty old destroyer takes on a German U-boat.
I'm not hearing anything.
Hold on a second. So that's David. He's the author that we're going to have on. All right. So let's see here. People joining us tonight. We've got Shane Stevenson, curator from the Buffalo and Erie County Naval Military Park. He's going to be logging on a little late because they've got an event going on over there. We've got John Epp from the USS Slater, curator at the USS Slater. You can always check them out at ussslater.org or their YouTube channel. Simply search for USS Slater. And we've got Connor, who is one of the admins with the Museum Ships Facebook group, joining us, or kind of helping us with the moderation tonight. So as we're talking about our subject, if you've got any questions, comments, Connor's going to be the one that's going to be organizing them and putting them up on the screen tonight. So let's check in with David. All right. David Sears, did we lose you? Can you not hear us anymore?
I hear.
Oh, boy. Can you hear us now? Everything was going so well.
I know it was. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm going to take the poor guy off. And
we'll work on this.
Yeah,
his earbuds went dead.
What's that?
Did your earbuds go dead?
Oh, you think his earbuds went dead? Yeah, normally when we kick these off, everyone logs on about maybe 15 minutes before we go live. We check out the microphones, we check out the connection, and most of the time Shane's the only one that gives us a problem. But then tonight David's having problems. Let's check this out. David, how about now? Can you hear us?
Oh, his mic's down too.
Oh, sorry, folks. We totally lost David. You know what? Connor, do you want to do your presentation? I'm going to log off and I'm going to give David a call and see if we can't figure this out.
Sure.
If you don't mind, I'm going to remove myself.
All right.
And I'm going to remove.
All right. Okay, well, welcome to the John and Connor show. Hey, John, how you doing?
Yeah, if I'm the host of something, then we're having issues.
All right. So everyone,
so what are you going to talk about here?
Yeah, so normally what I've been doing here on the show for the last 2 months now is I've taken some time to dedicate some time to a museum ship, a unique museum ship within the museum fleet. Last month, I covered the Acacia, which was a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, one of the famous. Okay, thank you, Tim. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that.
There's going to be somebody.
Yep. So, basically, I am covering a rather unique vessel today. I am covering. Come on. There we go. I am covering the. Where are the pictures? We're so organized tonight, aren't we, folks? Oh, here we are. Here we are. Oh yeah. Okay. Here we go. We are covering the museum ship Bradbury, which should be there. It is. So this is the Bradbury. In particular, she is CCGS Bradbury, a Canadian Coast Guard cutter, which served on Lake Winnipeg, starting in 1915 to 1973. A very unique ship. I've seen this vessel once back in 2021, and she is part of the Marine Museum of Manitoba today. And here she is right here with her museum mate, the Kenora.
How many vessels do they have as part of the museum?
They have 5. Most of them are small little river boats, but Bradbury and Kenora are the big ones. my apologies if I'm a little stuttered. I was planning this for later, but let's do a little bit of a history on her. The Bradbury was constructed by the Canadian government in 1915, and originally she was known as CGS Bradbury, Canadian Government Ship, versus the CCGS that she would later have, Canadian Coast Guard Ship. The Bradbury actually got into a bit of controversy when she was built, as this was the height of World War I, and she had a lot of mahogany and bronze fittings installed. And there was a lot of controversy at the time about the fact the ship was so fancy, despite being effectively a government workhorse. The ship was originally built for the Ministry of Transportation's Marine Service, which was the precursor to the Canadian Coast Guard, and she would serve in that capacity from 1915 to 1930. In 1930, she was actually transferred over to the Manitoba government, who would then, from what I've been able to read, then proceeded to transfer her to private owners. And private owners wouldn't do much with her. She would get a refit from a coal-powered boiler to a diesel engine. But other than that, though, she would stay relatively dead in the water, sitting by docks until 1952, when the Canadian government would repurchase the ship, and they would then actually recommission her as CGS Bradbury. Then in 1962, when the Canadian Coast Guard was founded and replaced the original Marine Service, she would end up serving as one of the first 49 vessels of the modern Canadian Coast Guard. And she would serve on Lake Winnipeg for the entirety of her career until 1973, wrong picture, right? 1973, when she was finally retired, and that same year was transported to the Manitoba Marine Museum, which you can see right here. It's a lovely museum. They have 5 ships all dragged up on land, with Kenora and Bradbury being the two big ones. And notably, Bradbury is the only ship in the Canadian Museum fleet that is in the original Transport Marine Service colors. So with sort of a grayish black hull versus the red hulls that Coast Guard ships are known for today. And if anyone is interested in going to see this lovely ship, she is located in Selkirk, Manitoba, about 45 minutes outside of Winnipeg to the north, right on the Red River. Fantastic place. And if you want to go see her yourself, you can always take a look at their website at marinemuseum.ca. I hope I've bought enough time for Ken. Are you there, Ken?
Yeah. Well, wait, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right.
What's going on?
So we had to play around with some audio stuff with David. We're going to bring him on. And David, can you hear us now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yay!
All right. Okay.
Thank goodness I had that all prepped.
Well, yeah, and you did a fantastic job. So hold on a second here.
Just like
I'm going
it
to
will.
rearrange the screens a little bit. And there, that's a little better. Oh, damn it.
I'm
Sorry,
back where I
guys.
belong. Oh,
Yeah.
shoot.
All right. So David Sears, okay, author of, and I'm going to pull this up because like I said, tonight's episode is a kind of like a favorite subject of mine when it comes to the Battle of the Atlantic. It's destroyer versus sub. And our guest tonight, David Sears, who is an author out of New Jersey, specializing in military history. He was an officer in the U.S. Navy and a Vietnam veteran. Written a number of different military-oriented books, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. But tonight, we wanted to talk to him about his latest book, which it is your latest book, right? It was published in 23, but you haven't published.
Published actually in October of 23, which was the actual 80th anniversary, Halloween, 1943, of this duel between a U.S. Navy destroyer and a German U-boat, U-405.
All right. And I think our viewers are going to really like this story. If you guys, anyone watching, when I was reading the description of this book, and when I first got in touch with David, the story that we're going to tell you tonight really sounds very similar to the story that's told in the movie Enemy Below. So if you're familiar with that, you might get a kick out of this. At least I did. In many cases, truth is more interesting than fiction. So I'm gonna, like I was telling you before, David, before we logged on, I've got your photos all set up and ready to go. And what can you tell us tonight?
Well, why don't you bring up image number 1?
This one right here?
I'm seeing some riverboats. The image, not my image number 1.
You're not seeing, oh boy, you're not seeing this image? Oh, wait, hold on a second. We need to take that down.
Oh, yeah. There we go.
There we go. All right. Yeah. This is, as they say, a 2023 book called Duel in the Deep. And it centers around the USS Borie, DD-215, which is a Clemson-class destroyer that was built, I think, commissioned in 2019, and set its life into World War II to end up dueling a German U-boat, U-405, on Halloween night, 1943. Now, this is something that's been written about before. In fact, I've written about in a magazine context. But I'm using the Borie as a way of giving some context to the American U.S. Navy experience in the Battle of the Atlantic. I mean, most books, many books, anyways, deal with the Battle of the Atlantic as a Royal Navy arena, which it largely was, but the U.S. Navy played a significant role. So I kind of focused on the Borie as a way to tell the U.S. Navy's story in the Battle of the Atlantic. So this is a it's a Clemson class destroyer. I'm a destroyer veteran myself. I was on a Gearing class destroyer, kind of a World War II era, back in the Vietnam era days. And having written other books, I'm familiar with the Fletcher class and Gearing class and some of the other World War II class destroyers. But entering this subject, it's hard to know. It was hard for me to figure out how to be kind of an expert on the Wicks and Clemson class destroyers, these World War II, World War I era destroyers. So if you go to image 2,
you got it.
So in writing this book, I came across a great comic book that's called the I think the Four Piper comic book, the old four stacker destroyer, which I think it's about 30 pages long, all illustrations, and it gave me a good way of understanding, the layout of the ship, some of the shipboard activities, how the spaces look, and most importantly for me, the good look at the engineering plant. So when I was writing about the Borie in World War II, I had this comic book for a guide, and I highly recommend it. If somebody wants to get a copy, I came across a copy in veterans papers, and I'd be glad to send you a copy if you want to drop me an email. Very, very informative. All right, so if you go on to image 3.
Sure.
They say this is something that's been written about, but the focus for me, I've written mostly about World War II in the Pacific, and this is shifting ground to the Atlantic. And I live in New Jersey, and this story has kind of a New Jersey flavor to it, because a lot of the crewmen on the Borie were from a reserve unit in New Jersey. A reserve unit from Baltimore also contributed a large number of men to the crew. And the setting here is, this is 1940, so it's before the U.S. entry into the World War II. And there was a thing called the Burke-Wadsworth Act, which was basically a draft notice that went out in the summer of 1940. And these kids, basically out of high school, to sidestep the draft, they volunteered for the Naval Reserve and got their call up in November of 1940. So this is basically almost a year and a half before Pearl Harbor, where they're thrust into the Navy. And these reserve groups, basically a lot of them, the person on the right is Bob Marr, excuse me, and he'd written a memoir about his time on the Borie. And in his particular example, he was out of high school and working as an insurance clerk in New York City. And he joined the reserves, got called up in November. And when he went to the Borie, and this was true of a number of his shipmates, he'd never had any military training whatsoever, other than a couple of reserve meetings he'd been to. He didn't even have a uniform. So basically, his first exposure to the U.S. Navy, to the seagoing Navy, came when he joined the Borie, and this was in Norfolk in, I believe, November of 1940, and got issued uniforms and began to learn about being a sailor in the United States Navy. Now you can move to image number 4. So the Borie is a class destroyer. There was another thing going on. There was a 2-ocean Navy being created by the U.S. Navy. And I think I've lost my contact here. No, I'm here. And ships like the Borie were older ships. New ships were building, and there was a process going on which was very roughly called the bleeding the fleet. A matter of sending experienced sailors to new ships and filling the older ship, the Borie, with inexperienced reservists. So it's an older ship. It's got a lot of inexperienced rookie sailors. And the best place to give them their training is to send them down to the Panama Canal. So for the first couple years of the war, or even before the war, the Borie was based in Balboa, part of the Panama Canal complex. And that was kind of the backwater of the war, but that's where they spent their initial period of training. All right, so let's move on to image number 5. So while the Bories and their crew are learning the ropes in Panama, the war starts December 1941 for the United States. And shortly thereafter, beginning basically in late January 1942, there's an operation called Operation Drumbeat. And this is an operation that has the Germans sending a small contingent, roughly, maybe 20 at most, of long-range submarines, long-range U-boats, to the eastern seaboard to look for targets of opportunity, for looking for freighters and other merchants along the east coast of the United States. I guess what's newly been named the Gulf of America, and parts of the Canadian coast. And basically from late January into August, they had a real field day. I think the figure I've got here is that in that process of Operation Drumbeat, 600 ships and basically 3 million tons of shipping were sunk. And of course, along with them, thousands of mariners were shipwrecked, and many of them died. So it's quite a crisis to start off the Battle of the Atlantic as far as the United States is concerned. Go to the next image 6. And the orchestrator of Operation Drumbeat was Karl Dönitz, who was in charge of the German U-boat fleet. He's a very single-minded, narrow-focused leader. His crews were very much devoted to him. He played a significant role in developing the U-boat fleet. And he actually, in conducting Operation Drumbeat, he had very limited resources. So it was kind of a, scrape the bottom type of activity, because most of his U-boats were either being maintained or were being directed into the Arctic and into the Mediterranean. So he only had a handful of U-boats to pull off with. But he was very persuasive in convincing Hitler to support Operation Drumbeat and basically declare war on the United States, because for the longest time, we're talking about 1939, 1940, and 1941, the U.S. was sending merchant ships, sometimes escorted by American ships, but often British ships, to supply Great Britain. And that was a great sore point with Dönitz, that this has been going on so long, we should not let the U.S. Get away with it. So his ambition was to generate something called the tonnage war, which was basically to sink more merchant ships that the U.S. and its allies could replace. And for a while it worked, and certainly there was a focus in North Atlantic where convoys were being consistently attacked by eventually by packs of U-boats, not by individual U-boats.
Hold on a second. We may have an issue. We appear to have lost. Ken has had to reboot, and unfortunately, when he rebooted, he took his photos with him. So we will just give me a second here.
Okay.
Yes.
So, David, I have a question. In reading the book, my understanding. Oh, certainly, it was very interesting. You talk about how the U-boat almost appeared to be signaling surrender one or two times during the attack. Was that your understanding as well, or just how it kind of read off to me?
Yeah, I think that during the attack, it's obviously kind of jumping ahead quite a bit, but I think during the attack there was a sense that maybe the boat was trying to surrender, but I think poor communication within the ship prevented that from being noticed, and the ship kept firing, and the U-boat just went on its way. So I think there was probably an attempt to surrender, but it didn't work out.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have Tim Nedsmith in the call, who was also at Henza 2023, and he received a copy of your book. Just wanted to say that he enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when you were doing the research for this book, were there any other destroyers that caught your interest, or what was your reason for focusing in on the Borie as the subject for this book?
Well, there were other ships, and a lot of them British, and a couple of them American, that either pulled off this stunt or tried to pull off this stunt. I think I'd focused on the Borie because it was a World War I era destroyer called up for duty in World War II, and I think that the nature of the attack, so many of these U-boat destroyer battles, they're kind of cat and mouse escapades where the submarine is submerged and the destroyer or the whatever escort vessel is in pursuit is trying to track them with sonar, basically. And it's a submerged battle with a ship on the surface and a submarine submerged. This happened to be a battle that actually occurred mainly on the surface. Depth charges were dropped. Apparently it blew U-405 to the surface, and the chase was on. You mentioned the movie The Enemy Below. I think that was one of those examples of a battle between a ship and a U-boat where the U-boat was mainly submerged. But this was quite a bit different. Once the battle started, it was a battle on the surface, and it got into close quarters. So it's kind of an exciting battle. It lasted for about an hour, and it happened in the context of how the U.S. involvement in the Battle of the Atlantic was evolving. So those were some of the reasons that I chose it.
Hey, David, I'm going to
Okay.
interrupt you real quick.
And
we just got Shane joining us. I had like a power outage here, but now I'm back up. So
It must be electricity from Canada.
I'm here.
I don't know. It's been like a crazy night. And when I logged off, did you guys lose the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
yes,
So-
we did.
What a nightmare. All right. Shane, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. Great. Hi, David. Nice to see you again from the HINSA conference in Albany. And yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please continue.
Well, hold on a second. We're trying to repair everything. I'm turning your mic up.
So before I forget, I have a general question, and I'm so embarrassed I have to ask this.
What?
So it's essentially late 1944. You got a World War I force.
No, late 1943.
1943. Yes. Yep. Nearly 1944. You got a World War I force stacker that's not really equipped for this modern warfare. Do you know?
Well, it is. Let me say, by 1943, it essentially was, because it was part of a hunter-killer group that included an escort carrier.
Right.
It had sonar. It now had surface radar, and it had been modernized in terms of its weapons capability. So it was brought up to date. It was ready in early 1943, where it was not ready in 1940 when it was when the crew I'm talking about joined the ship.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of the evolution of the U.S. Navy as far as the Battle of the Atlantic was concerned.
So we gave a large number of these ships to England, obviously.
Yeah.
By late 1943, do you know offhand how many we were still using to escort convoys in the Atlantic?
Well, they weren't so much, by 1943, they
Or
weren't so
in
much
hunter-killer groups.
escorting convoys as they were escorting these hunter-killer groups centered around the escort carriers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in 1943, this was the ships like the Slater, for example, which was a DE, were finally coming online. So these old World War I destroyers being phased out, and the DEs were just coming in, and that, you know, the DEs came into their own basically in very late 1943 into 1944 and 1945.
David, where did you want to pick up when I so rudely stole the
That's all right.
presentation?
Tell you what, let's go to, we've talked about Operation Drumbeat a little bit.
Right.
I think people are familiar with that and familiar
Yep.
with Carl Dönitz.
Mhm.
Let's go on to Image 7, which is, that's good to have them together, Ernest King and Dudley Pound. Now, when the U.S. Navy gets into the war and into the Battle of the Atlantic, there's a question of how it's going to be handled. And Dudley Pound, who was the first Sea Lord, was already had basically 2.5 years of experience fighting U-boats, and he very consciously tried to get a unified command. When I say unified, under British command. And Admiral King, who was, you know, taking a lot of heat because of the casualties, the shipping that was lost during Operation Drumbeat, was under a lot of pressure to go along with this, to let the British take over and be in overall command of the resources in the Battle of the Atlantic. And he resisted for a number of reasons. I think, you know, he's widely accused of being an Anglophobe, but I think that's probably something to do with it. But he also saw the U.S. Navy as one that was growing and ascended, while the British Navy was, in his view anyway, on the decline. And he saw all the different complexities that go into having a unified command. And although there was a common language, English-speaking language, there were so many differences in logistics, in protocols, in communications, in code books, even the matter of whether you could have alcohol on a warship at sea. So he was very resistant. He said we can find ways of cooperating, but as far as a unified command, that's not going to be the way the U.S. Navy is going to operate. Now, early in the war, these cross-Atlantic convoys that were escorted both by British and American ships have to meet in the middle of the ocean for a number of reasons, mainly that most of these escorts were not what's called long leg. They could get across the Atlantic, but they couldn't maneuver in doing that. Weren't really up to speed on underway refueling. So these convoys had to be handed off in mid-ocean, and actually that turned out to be a very dangerous time where all these merchant ships were milling around, waiting for one set of escorts to depart and another set of escorts to take over. And
Wait, so they literally would just park in the middle of the ocean and wait for
drift around, drift around,
and wait for escorts to come over from it to bring them the rest of the way to England.
Yeah, there was something called the mission meeting point, MOMP, where
I never heard of that.
Yeah, well, the British, if it was a convoy going from say from Halifax to Great Britain, there would be a combination of Canadian and American escorts that would take the convoy part way and then be joined by British escorts coming from Britain. There would be, handover protocol. They had to find each other. They had to make a formal turnover. And while that was happening, especially early on, it was an efficient process, and the convoys would have to not a dead stop, but they'd have to kind of mill around waiting for this to happen. And that was a pretty vulnerable position for these merchants to be in. So, as much as was a cry for an overall command, there were a number of logistic issues that made that kind of impossible. And at least in terms of the U.S. perspective. And you'll see later on, basically in 1943, there were solutions that came up to solve that, and that played a significant role for the U.S. Navy, and also in this case for the USS Borie, how it was assigned to a hunter-killer task group centered around a escort carrier.
We appear to have lost Ken again. So Shane, do you have any questions?
No, Ken, good. He's there, but
Okay.
no,
Sorry,
I'm just trying to catch up, with the conversation. So I'm just kind of absorbing it. And
All right.
are we doing it chronologically? Like, are we speaking about this one particular action here, or just now is it kind of generally go and do at convoys and talk about the gap and everything? Or
what I'm hoping to do, I don't know if it's being pulled off, I'm trying to give some context to the story behind the story of the Borie versus the UO5. Yeah, using the Borie as an example of an experience in the Battle of the Atlantic as far as the U.S. Navy is concerned. And I guess we're jumping around a little bit now because
sorry about that. Yeah, we were at this.
Okay, we're talking about cooperation between coordination and coordination between the United States Navy and the Royal Navy. We mentioned King and Dudley Pound. So there was no unified command early when the Americans joined the Battle of the Atlantic. but there were already ongoing bits of cooperation. And here you can go to image number 9. I'm not sure if you recognize this picture, but there's a British scientist called Henry Tizard. He's pictured in the center of this image. And in late 1940, he led what was called the Tizard mission to the United States, bringing over examples of all the technologies and techniques that the British were using in the Battle of the Atlantic. And the most significant addition was the cavity magnetron, which enabled the miniaturization or the reduction in size of radar units. It was probably and that's what he's holding in his, right hand, and Tizard is pointing at it. So it was an example of these prototypes, technologies, operational techniques that the UK was sharing with the US. The US would take these innovations, and basically their role was to industrialize them and use these prototypes to produce these technical marvels on a grander scale, what was called the Wizard War. So that was an underlying feature of the Battle of the Atlantic, where the UK and the United States were not an overall command, but were cooperating with each other.
He was British. He was British, or he was American?
He was British. There's I'm going to forget a name here. Tizard was a rival of Winston Churchill's scientific advisor. I cannot think of his name. And after the Tizard mission, Tizard was actually pushed to the side. But in 1940, he brought a lot of innovations, a lot of technologies to be shared with the U.S. and brought them over to the United States.
So if we're talking about King and Dudley Pound, were they not part of the CJS, like the
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were.
Gotcha.
And Dudley Pound was, I believe, ailing at that time and was eventually replaced by Max Horton.
Okay. So there was some coordination, but again, even like with the British wanted to go through Italy and the Mediterranean, and, King always wanted to focus obviously more on US and the Pacific, I think. So it would be interesting to hear more of a deep dive between the relationship and the command and control between these two guys.
I'm not fully hearing your question.
Oh, Shane was just talking about the connection between King and
Pound.
Thank you. Yep. So, did we lose you, David?
No, I'm here. If you can hear me.
The way tonight's been going, I wouldn't be surprised if we did. Let's see.
I come on late and everything starts to fall to hell.
Yeah. So, all right.
Things were messing up before you showed up, Shane.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, we've had connection issues and power issues. Anyway, so all right, moving on, because this is actually when you had included a picture of the Enigma, I wanted to find out how this played into the story.
Yeah, again, the Borie, using, it's my kind of symbol or my example, telling the story of getting to the story of the Borie versus U-45, but I'm trying to give context of the U.S. Navy's experience in the Battle of the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Enigma, a German coding machine, which the British were very busy in trying to decipher this code. There were actually there were a number of variations of Enigma, and it turned out that the German Navy had the most elaborate system. It was the hardest to crack. And even during the early part of 1941 and 1942, there were times when even the Brits could not decipher Enigma, could not produce what was called Ultra, the highly secret information resulting from Enigma decrypts. And they relied a lot on direction finding, radio direction finding, to plot the location and movements of U-boats. And if you move on to image number 11, and 11 and 12, the Brits had a very sophisticated submarine tracking room that was run by an individual named Roger Wynne. And one thing that Ernest King was willing to cooperate with the British was in establishing the U.S. Navy's own submarine tracking room. And the person chosen to run that is a person named Kenneth Knowles, which you see on the right. And towards the end of 1942, Kenneth Knowles was sent over to Britain to train under Roger Wynne. So he came back, Knowles came back to the U.S. in December of 1942 and set up the U.S. Navy's own submarine tracking room. Now, at this stage, the Brits really controlled the flow of information coming out of Enigma, the so-called ultra highly top secret information about the German submarines. And the U.S. was really dependent on the information that the Brits shared with them, and also had to share the Brits' reluctance to use that information. They didn't want to have the fact that they knew that they could break the code. They didn't want to have that known by the Germans. So they were very secretive and very reluctant about instances where they'd share that information and use that information in attacking U-boats. The U.S. at this stage was kind of pulling on the reins, wanting to have a wider use of that ultra information, but Britain was holding back. But King did cooperate with the British in terms of linking these two individuals together. They're learning to track the placements of submarines, basically because the submarines are centrally controlled. U-boats are centrally controlled by Dönitz, and they have to send radio transmissions frequently. And with radio direction finding, that became the primary way of tracking where U-boats were and where they were going. So this is kind of takes us to the end of 1942. We've got King, who's resisting a unified command for fighting submarines in the Atlantic. We have some sharing of technologies, and we have cooperation on submarine tracking, and we have some sharing of technologies going on. So now we can move to the beginning of 1943, and I'm going to take you to image 13. This is an example of a escort carrier. A big issue with anti-submarine warfare were the blank spots, the black holes, in terms of air cover for convoys crossing the Atlantic. The main means prior to the arrival of the escort carriers was to use long-range 4-engine or 2-engine bombers that could either fly from Halifax, from Iceland, from Greenland, in some cases from the British Isles, but there were places that they just couldn't reach. And the idea behind the CVE, which were used in both the Pacific and in the Atlantic, but they emerged in the Atlantic beginning in 1942 as a way of covering those black spots, providing air cover, portable air cover that could travel with convoys, either travel with the convoys or be organized to the flagships of so-called hunter-killer groups. Now, they were used in both the North Atlantic and in the South Atlantic and Central Atlantic, but they had a difficult time used where the North Atlantic convoys traveled because of weather and sea conditions. So they had more use and potentially better use in the Central Atlantic or South Atlantic, and the formation of these hunter-killer groups provided an opportunity for escorts such as the USS Borie. So this happens beginning of 1942. You have the CVEs emerge, start putting together hunter-killer groups, and they're finding that these aging destroyers, which have been in the backwaters for much of this time, are now available as escorts for these hunter-killer groups centered around escort carriers.
So these escort carriers, they couldn't handle bad weather very well?
No, they couldn't. They were slow. They were not very maneuverable. They were equipped with radar. They also had radio direct finding capabilities. But no, especially in the winter time, North Atlantic, there were many days where they just couldn't, aircraft just couldn't take off from their decks.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So they were used, but not too extensively in North Atlantic. But as we'll see, they had a greater use in the Central and South Atlantic. So we'll move to image 14.
You got it.
Okay. So if you want to bounce back briefly to, I guess, image number 1, which was the USS Borie, probably in the late 1920s or 1930s, and then jump back to image number 14. This is the Borie sometime in 1942 during a conversion. I think the crow's nest is still showing there, so it doesn't have its radar gear yet. And absent radar gear, that was the best way of telling where the ship was to have people crawl up in the crow's nest. Jeez. But they got radar, both surface search and air search. They had more armor attached. They had an enclosed bridge. They had more anti-aircraft capabilities, basically 20 millimeter cannons, which proved very consequential in the battle with U-405. So, they'd come a long way from where they were in late 1940, 1941. And their crews are trained. They're no longer the reservists have become capable sailors and petty officers. So the Borie and a number of other types of these Clemson ships have spent their time in the backwaters of the Battle of the Atlantic, but now they've come into their own, at least in terms of escorting these hunter-killer groups centered around escort carriers. And their use comes in just at the time that the real escorts, the destroyer escorts, were coming online, ships like the Slater. So we can move to the next image. And they have the Borie has a new young captain. His name is Charles Hutchins. He's an academy graduate in the mid-30s, but he left the Navy to go into private industry and had been called back when the war started. Originally began as the XO, the executive officer on the Borie, and replaced another academy graduate who kind of muffed a convoy assignment off of South America. So he was sent back to the academy to teach English, and which was my major, by the way. and Charles Hutchins took over. He's young. He's about 30 years old.
Jeez.
Aggressive and eager to be hunting U-boats. So this is the rough time frame here is February, March, and April of 1943. Okay, so now we can move to image number 16.
All right.
Okay, here we are. This is Black May. This was a turning point, certainly as far as the British experience in the Battle of the Atlantic was concerned. In the space of a month, basically a month, 41 U-boats were sunk, which represented about 25% of the operational capability of the U-boat fleet. The U-boat fleet was roughly 300, but the operationally ready U-boats were about 120. So they lose, maybe 150. So they lose 41 boats. The Germans lose 41 U-boats during the month of May, and Dönitz is so concerned that he basically recalls U-boats, pulls them out of the North Atlantic convoy routes, and takes them south, basically to the Central Pacific, where he believes. Now you've lost me. Where he believes. Hello.
Oh, we can
Still good. You're still good.
Yeah, you're great.
Where he believes they will be safe from aerial attacks, because a lot of these sinkings that are occurring are it's aircraft that are detecting and sinking these U-boats. The technology such as radar are now on these bombers, and the escort ships can use radio direction function. So it gets to be a slaughter along the convoy routes of the North Atlantic. So if we move to...
Shane, you got a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Sorry. So by this time, Germany was only building like 19 U-boats a month. Is that what I read at one time?
I don't know. They were building. They continued to have a lot of U-boats. The problem was that they were just building the same U-boats they'd always been building. And these boats were basically, they're surface ships that can stay submerged for a certain period of time. The radar capabilities that the Allies have could fairly easily detect them when they're on the surface. They have limited fueling capabilities, so they're getting the crews are getting more of the same thing, and the U-boats are becoming more vulnerable both from the air and from the sea. So the Germans never stopped building these U-boats, but they certainly were less effective than they had, and they were trying to they were coming up with innovations. They had invented something called the snorkel, which enabled the submarine to remain submerged longer, but also on some occasions could risk asphyxiating the crew. So they were getting as many subs, but they were more and more vulnerable.
So Dönitz recalled a lot of the U-boats because he was upset about them getting wiped out by air cover. But did he know that we had started kicking out these escort carriers and producing these escort?
Well, yeah, he became aware of that. I think early in 1943, he thought initially that they were aircraft tenders, and during one of these, I think it was probably in April, he began to recognize, hey, these are actual aircraft carriers, and he would simply say to his skippers, either get them first or stay away from them. So he was aware this was coming. I don't think he was aware of the extent. He was not aware of the extent of these new weapons, and he never was aware, although he had his doubts, but he was never aware that the Allies broke the German Navy enigma. So he was not aware of how closely his his U-boats were being tracked.
Gotcha. Okay. Hey, before we move on, I just want to remind everybody that we're talking to David Sears tonight. He's joining us, military historian and author who wrote Duel in the Deep, published in 2023. So he's telling us about, giving us kind of like the lead up to a story between a destroyer and a sub, and giving us the background on what's happening in the Atlantic during World War II. All right, David, sorry for interrupting, but you had us at this point here.
Yeah, we're going to image number 17.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this same May, the same Black May for German U-boats in the North Atlantic convoy routes. Admiral King was, I want to say, finally getting his act together, but finally being decisive about how he wanted to organize the U.S. Navy battle U-boats. He established something called 10th Fleet. It's known as a paperless fleet. It basically encompasses any U.S. Navy resource in or around the Atlantic. 10th Fleet reports to Ernest King, so there's no, there's no quibbling about who has command of the unit. Operationally, it's handled by a guy named Francis Lowe. Frog Lowe is his nickname, and he's a submariner. He runs 10th Fleet on an operational basis. So whenever he needs a resource to track down a U-boat, he can order any ship, any aircraft, any squadron available to track this down. And that is the unified command that Ernest King was preparing for. And it finally went into effect in April and May of 1933. So, these components start to come together. These technologies like miniature radar, the escort carriers, the old World War I destroyers like Borie being upgraded. You have a submarine tracking capability. And then finally, if you look on, this is image number 18, we talked about the Enigma machine and the decoding of the German Enigma codes. Here's another example where the British pioneered what were called bombas, these massive machines, not so much to break the code, but to decipher the daily keys, the information used to set up the Enigma machines. And the U.S. industrialized the British bombers so that they could quickly get these code keys, very quickly decipher the Enigma transmissions. And the U.S. no longer had to rely as much on the Brits for getting this information. And they could also make more aggressive use of the ultra information in specific terms to track down, at least as far as the Borie and the CVEs in this book are concerned, tracking down U-boat refueling sites. They can find out a week ahead of time or 10 days ahead of time where these refuelings are going to occur. And these will involve what are called milk cows. These are big U-boats. And they're going to involve not just one, but probably as many as a dozen U-boats are going to be operating in the same area, usually around the Azores, somewhere in Central Pacific, where CVEs and their aircraft can operate more freely. And instead of, trying to, they're not telling the Germans that they're doing that, but the Americans are less secretive about how they use this ultra information to target German U-boats. let's go to image 19. So this is the skipper of the U-405. His name is Rolf Heinrich Hoffman. He's an experienced U-boat commander. He's been with U-405, I believe, since his commissioning. He's 36 years old, former merchant mariner. He's probably older than most U-boat commanders at this time. And he and U-405 have spent most of their wartime in the Arctic. So he's not had experience, not that much experience or successful experience in tracking convoys. He is an experienced mariner with a good crew, but his is one of the ships that's been pulled down from the north and sent for refueling in a spot in and around the Azores Islands in the central Pacific.
That must have been annoying.
So let's set the stage here. It's a CVE called USS Card, one of these escort carriers, with 3 escorting destroyers, one of them the USS Borie. They are tasked with going to target this refueling site, and they do rather successfully. I think they sink a couple of submarines, but the task force commander is upset because he believes his aircraft have failed to sink the refueling ship, and he wants to get that refueling ship. It's getting near dark on October 31st, 1943. The aircraft on the USS Card can mainly, they can take off and land at night, but they can't very successfully operate at night. So the task force commander takes a chance. He's going to send one of his 3 destroyers, USS Borie, out into the darkness to track down this submarine. So that's kind of the context. Here we have a ship that we first met in 1940. By 1943, it has an active role in the Battle of the Atlantic, and on this Halloween night, it sets out to find a refueling submarine. It actually finds a couple of submarines using a combination of sonar and radar. Hutchins, who's the skipper, thinks he's actually sunk one of those and reports that to the USS Card and says, we're going to continue to hunt for other submarines because we don't have to be back escorting the Card until the following morning. And they find another submarine, which happens to be the U-405, which is not a refueling submarine. It's just a standard Type 7 operational submarine. And they happen to throw down a depth charge spread that actually docks the U-405 to the surface. So this is I've been giving context. Maybe you want more about the battle itself, but to me, the book was about giving some context to the U.S. experience in the Battle of the Atlantic and showing how a ship like this could start in the backwaters, a crew starting as raw recruits, and end up being sent out alone to track down the submarine and getting into this iconic battle. So let's take you now to image number 20. Excuse me. So I'll give you just a minute to look this over. This is actually the track of the battle of the between the U-405 and the USS Borie. You can see in let's see, it's if you see box number 3 that's labeled number 3, this is where the depth charge sends the depth charges send the U-405 to the surface, and the chase is on. Now, so the U-405, basically during this battle, apparently cannot submerge. It can only stay on the surface. So the Borie is a fast ship. faster than the U-405, but U-405 has a much tighter turning radius. So in many ways, it can kind of outmaneuver the ship. But the Borie has the advantage because it's on the surface, and the U-405 is apparently trapped on the surface. The Borie has, I can't how many now, it has multiple 3-inch guns, and it also has multiple 20 millimeter mounts. So it has a lot of firepower. But Hopman is a pretty crafty commander. He leads the Borie on a chase here, and at some points is angling to fire torpedoes at the Borie. The Borie is firing with 3-inch cannons and 20 millimeters, and they go into a series of turns. The U-405 disappears for a while, thinks it's escaping. The Borie turns off its searchlight to act as if it's no longer in pursuit. And when they pick up another radar image, the light goes on. There's the U-405. And in the closing moments, they're kind of traveling side by side, with the Borie firing all its deck weapons, and the U-405 crew struggling to get topside and use their weapons. Fairly early in the battle, the 3-inch guns on the Borie shoot off the main gun mount on the U-405, and all the while the crew trying to get to the U-405's machine guns are being being massacred by the 20 millimeters. And towards the end, we're going to get to box number 10. Borie Hutchins makes the decision to try to ram the U-405. And again, I said this has happened, quite a bit. Mainly British ships trying to ram German U-boats. But the Borie gives its try, and at the last moment, the U-405, just shifts slightly, and the Borie runs up on top of the main deck of the U-405. So we can come back to this image, but let's go to I
got a question for you real quick though, because
sure.
do we ever find out why the 405? I know you said the 405 disappeared for a brief period of time, but the Borie reacquires it. But do you ever find out why the 405 was stuck on the surface?
Other than the fact that it depth charge damage, they just the Borie crew just assumed they couldn't, otherwise they would have.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So
at the surface, the U-405 can go maybe 14, 15 knots.
Mm-hmm.
If it's submerged, it could be much slower, but it would be invisible. The Borie had sonar; it could track it that way. So you have to assume that the U-405 was incapable of submerging, because on the surface, even though they were faster on the surface, they were not fast enough to outrun the Borie.
Yeah, and so you're making the assumption that the depth charges that were dropped in block number 3 on this diagram impacted its ability to go down again.
Yeah, in fact, Bob Bayer, the guy who wrote the memoir of the Borie, he was a I don't want to say a gunner, but he was in charge of the gunnery, tracking system. He was on the top bridge, the flying bridge, and he was the one that spotted the U-405 when it surfaced. It was right there. I mean, it was very close to the Borie.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you could go to image number, we can come back to the track if you want, but go to image number 21.
There you go.
Now, this is you saw the cover of the book. This is another depiction of what that battle was like, and I think probably pretty it's kind of dramatic here, but it's probably pretty close to what was happening. You can see that the Borie is riding up on the deck. Now, Borie truly was a tin can because its armor was insignificant, and it very clearly there were breaks in its hull, and it began to take on water while this battle was going on. And but you can begin to see there's the spotlight. There's small arms fire going on. There were crewmen who picked up shell casings and threw them at people on the submarine. Now this is all, of course, all by accounts from the USS Borie crewmen, but this is probably a pretty good depiction of the battle as it went on. So although it was not hand-to-hand fighting, and there was an example later on where a U.S. Navy destroyer rammed a German submarine, and some of the German submarine crew came on the deck of a destroyer escort. But although this was not hand-to-hand, you can see it's pretty much like more reminiscent of ground combat than it is of destroyer versus submarine.
And you're talking about sailors that don't really have that hand-to-hand training.
No.
Yeah.
And there's the executive officer. They broke open the small arms locker. They had shotguns. They had submachine guns. They had, I'm assuming, M1. Oops, I'm gone. Okay.
No, you're not. You're still there.
So there was, this is probably a pretty accurate description. So now there was a point where U-405 clearly, the people from the U-boat were diving into the water. The battle was over, seemed to be over, and the skipper reported that he intended to pick up survivors. But as he moved to do that, there was a report, another sonar report, I believe a sonar or radar, or maybe even a suspicion of a torpedo in the water. So you have to remember that Borie is here all by itself in the middle of the night, the middle of the Atlantic, and Hutchins had to make the decision to just keep going, get out of there. So as far as we know, or as far as I know, all the crew of the U-405 were lost that night. And the Borie was still afloat, but it had significant damage to its hull, and it was taking on water. This is probably early morning of November 1st, and the Borie has to make its way back to the task group. And they're not really that far from the task group. I think it was about 30 miles or so, but taking on water and traveling in rough seas, it had all it could do to get back to the task group. So go to image number 22.
All right. Let's see.
Now this is also from a Life magazine account, and this was the name is going to escape me. Who is the journalist who wrote about the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima? I'll be able to look it up.
Well, it wasn't Ernie Pyle.
Nope. Very famous author.
I don't know. I give up.
Wait a second, I'm going to get it to you.
Wait, no.
John Hersey. John Hersey was aboard the USS Card. He was the one who wrote that long New Yorker article turned into a book about dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. So he wrote this Life magazine account, And the Borie got back to the task group. It got back in the early morning of the 1st of November. But by that time, its propulsion system was corrupted by salt water. Its electrical capabilities, including its generators, were no longer functional. It found the task group, or the task group found it. The other destroyers went to the aid of the Borie. There were 2 other destroyers that Clemson class destroyer that were supporting the USS Card. And for most of the morning and afternoon, they tried to come alongside the Borie and send over fresh water to help with their propulsion systems. And they spent most of the day unsuccessfully trying to do that. So by the time late afternoon, 1600, 1700, they finally decided to abandon ship. And it was pretty poor timing because seas were rough. It was getting dark. And although the ships were close, it was not an easy matter to get over the side, get to the these flotation devices, and to make their way to the other destroyers. So in the process of a crew of about, I think it's about 120, exactly 27 sailors went missing, were presumed dead, including several of the key officers who tried to help help the crew get on board the rescue destroyers. So it was pretty, a pretty chaotic event, and a tragic loss of life, very heroic efforts to rescue these men, but they probably had wasted time trying to preserve the Borie. It was that, never give up the ship ethos that contributed to a high number of casualties from what otherwise was a very successful engagement.
Well, how long was it from the time that geez, how do I ask this question? I mean, so
how long was
roughly
it?
an hour. Roughly an hour. In the battle itself, took roughly an hour.
Okay. And then after the battle, the Borie's dealing with all of these mechanical issues, like you said. It took on salt water, and then
Yeah, it was another 8 hours or so before they got within sight of the task group.
Okay, 8 hours. So in 8 hours time,
and they spent
from
the morning until the late afternoon trying to get the Borie's propulsion system back online. As one of the veterans' children told me that it was time that they should have abandoned ship right away and saved more crewmen than they were able to.
Because at the end of the battle, all the crew members were probably still had been accounted for.
Yes, they were. In fact, there was some slight flesh wounds, but no serious wounds. So everybody was more or less in good shape when the Borie got back to the task group.
So like you said, it wasn't until after the battle where they're trying to save the ship. Would you say 27 or 29 went down with the ship?
27. It didn't go down with the ship, but was lost in the process of trying to be rescued. A feature of these. Go back to image number 1. Maybe you can see this here.
Hold on a second.
You can't. But the fantail of the Clemson class destroyers. One negative feature of the Clemson class destroyers that when the ship tried to accelerate, its fantail would quite often go underwater, and
really
they had a series of what were called propeller guards around the back of the fantail. It's kind of like steel piping that wrapped around the fantail of the ship to basically protect the propellers. And that was, quite often the point of rescue, trying to come under the fantail, waiting for the fantail to be submerged and then coming on board. And it turned out a number of crewmen actually, got concussed by these propeller guards and drowned trying to get on the ship. It looked like an easy way to get on the ship, but it could as easily be, means of death to be hit by one of those propeller guards.
The sailor that wrote the memoir, he was concussed by that, wasn't he? He tried climbing it and did it hit him in the head?
Yeah, he's right. And I'm trying to think. He did, but he was pulled in, and I think he woke up later. There was one officer that I profiled because I have information. His name was Morrison Brown, and in fact, I got in touch with him through his daughter, who was also named Morrison Brown. She was named after her father, and she was born after he died. But he prided himself on being a great swimmer, and he didn't go on one of the life rafts. He just tried to swim over to one of the rescue ships, and just got so tired by the time he got there that he wasn't able to climb aboard. So his life was lost. And I think there was another occasion where one of the rescue ships actually hit one of the rafts and crushed the skull of another officer. So it was kind of a tragic end to what would have been otherwise, well, at least for the Americans, a kind of a glorious story, not for the Germans, of course. It's interesting. The survivors were adamant. They were building a new USS Borie, and the surviving crewmen were really adamant that they'd like to get, they'd like as a crew, these survivors on the deck of the USS Card, that they wanted to get on. They wanted to be the crew on the new USS Borie. Instead, they were transferred to another four Piper, another Clemson class destroyer. But it turned out that the USS Borie, the new USS Borie, late in the war in the Pacific, was, I believe, the last warship hit by a kamikaze aircraft, and about 45 of that crew, members of that crew, were lost during that attack. So it's probably just as well that these survivors didn't go on to be part of the crew of the new USS Borie.
Wow, what a story! Jeez.
So I think I appreciate your patience with this. What I would hope to do, and maybe hope to do better, was to give you some idea of the context of the U.S. Navy in the Battle of the Atlantic, which is typically, and rightly so, told from a German perspective, obviously, but also from a British perspective, because they'd been in the Battle of the Atlantic since 1939. The U.S. Navy joined in part by escorting ships before the war, but didn't really get up to full speed until the end of 1942 and the beginning of 1943. But in getting up to the speed, just its capabilities to, for example, industrialize the decoding of German Enigma, to build and utilize these escort carriers, to upgrade their World War I destroyers so that they could be used in the Battle of the Atlantic. And all that came together towards the end of 1943.
Uh-huh.
So you can say that the turning point in the turning point for the Allies, and certainly for the British in the Battle of the Atlantic, came in May 1943. The U.S. spotlight really took effect in August, September, and October of 1943. That's when the U.S. Navy came into its own, and the formation of the 10th Fleet gave Admiral King a way of demonstrating how a unified command should really work.
So what I guess what I'm curious about is what made you want to tell this part of the story of World War II in your book?
Well, a number of factors. I've written my other books have largely focused on the war in the Pacific. I am a destroyer veteran, and I think the New Jersey angle, about 25 of the crew were sailors from the kind of in the area where I live myself. So it was that kind of fascination. And again, I wanted to use it as make it a hero of the United States involvement in the Battle of the Atlantic. Not, turn the focus to the United States Navy in that campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So, a combination of things. I'd also written a magazine article, and in researching that article, I thought, well, boy, this needs a little more context. How did the Borie get to this point in October of 1943? So that seemed a worthy effort.
And when did you first start working on this?
Well, it was published in October of 2023. So I'm going to say this is my COVID book.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, started sometime in 2020. 21 into 22, and then probably delivered the manuscript at the end of 2022 and moved towards publication to incident with the 80th anniversary of the battle.
And looking at your bibliography at the end, how were you able to get in contact with some of these families? I noticed you were able to find access to personal letters from a few of the survivors.
Yeah,
interviews.
It used to be very easy to get in contact with living veterans and deceased veterans. I wrote my first book called The Last Epic Naval Battle, and it was the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Leyte Gulf. And I set out to interview 60 participants from various aspects of the battle. And so this was in 2005. It was relatively easy to find 60 participants. I'm not sure I could find any now.
Probably not.
And that was kind of word of mouth. You'd find one and he'd point you to somebody else, and very easy. And at War with the Wind, which is about the kamikaze experience, it was originally published, I believe, in 2008. Really? That long? Oh boy, how old I've gotten.
I think it was 2000. I think it was 2008.
Right, well, anyway, I upped my ambition and I said, okay, I'm going to find out all these ships and I'm going to try to get I think I set myself a goal of interviewing 300 veterans across all these ships, and that was relatively easy. I think in the case of Duel in the Deep, which was 2020, 2021, and 2022, I think it helped that these crewmen were in and around the New Jersey area, so I could look through old clippings of New Jersey newspapers. I could reach out to the towns and libraries in those towns, and it was, I wasn't able to find living veterans, but I was able to find, what they left behind, diaries, and letters, and journals and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I want to mention before we run out of time here is that so the book that David is referring to, At War with the Wind, primarily about the Pacific kamikaze attacks on U.S. warships. And of course, we've had the USS Kidd on, whether it's Tim Nesmith or Park Stevenson. But you have, let's see, so At War with the Wind, that came out in paperback, but now it's also in audiobook format now, correct?
Yeah, it was recently reissued in, I think, early 2024. Quality paperback, and Audible picked it up as an audiobook. So, and that's that's because I think it's because the 80th anniversary of the kamikazes is coming up.
Yeah, I think I remember Tim Nesmith from the USS Kidd mentioning it's the 80th anniversary of their kamikaze attack too.
Yes, it is. In fact, Kidd was one of the ships featured in the book.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, guys. David Sears joining us tonight. Very generous with your time. We appreciate the story. And, we had originally talked about having you on for about a half hour, and it's gone on a lot longer than that. So definitely appreciate the background on the Battle of the Atlantic.
I very, very much appreciate your time. I think my effort was to give some context to this battle. I hope I've done that. And I'd be glad to answer any further questions. I don't know if you have my website address. Yes, you did. duelinthedeep.com.
Yep, and it's scrolling across the bottom of the screen right now.
Yep. That's you can contact me if you want to email me and for more information. Glad to do it.
It's a fabulous book. So I hope we have some of the listeners going out and picking up a copy. It was a very good read.
Yeah, you can go to www.duelinthedeep.com. We also have a link in the description of the broadcast tonight. Duel in the Deep by David Sears. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the background on the Battle of the Atlantic, giving us some of the background story, not only when it comes to the Enigma, but also actually I do want a quick question, although I think I know what the answer is. Let me see if I can find the picture. So this picture here, which I inadvertently combined, but you had given me in order. So you've got King on the left, and then you have the British. I keep forgetting his name.
Dudley Pound.
Thank you. But King on the left. So King wasn't he originally in charge of the Pacific, and then he was relieved after Pearl Harbor, and he was assigned the Atlantic?
No. Don't ascribe that to Ernest King. No, he.
Well, that's why I'm asking. So I have that wrong. So he was always. I saw Jane even shaking his head.
Once Pearl Harbor was attacked, he had been in charge of he's a fascinating individual. There's a new biography came out on him by David Conan, and he's a naval aviator. He's a naval submariner. He was in charge of the Atlantic Fleet and the Atlantic Squadron, and then the Atlantic Fleet. Mm-hmm. And after Pearl Harbor, he ascended after Pearl Harbor. He became what was called Com-Inch, which is Commander-in-Chief, which had him both in charge of the operational U.S. Navy fleets and the administrative and support units as well. So he was in charge of everything shortly after Pearl Harbor. He took a lot of heat for what was going on in Operation Drumbeat, but he kept his counsel. He didn't waver in terms of keeping his independence, and he systematically reorganized or reordered the use of the U.S. fleets. So people like Chester Nimitz reported to Admiral King. And he, as opposed to Nimitz and some other figures, he more or less kept out of the immediate spotlight. He was very influential and very persuasive um, not in the background, but he was a very strong commander in chief.
Got it. Thanks. For
Ken,
the,
you might be thinking of Admiral
Kimmel?
Kim. Yeah. Thank you.
Kimmel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so King was also CNO as well. So he was the highest guy. He was the highest ranking officer in the Navy during World War II.
Well, actually, that was Leahy.
Well, right, Leahy, but yeah, he was like a Roosevelt's,
Leahy was the CNO when he was. He remained the senior U.S. Admiral, but he was moved to. He went over to London.
Yes.
Leahy was the one who fought the fact that the British had this very successful submarine tracking system, and kind of recommended to King that he investigate and maybe set up one of his own.
Okay. Well, I want to remind everybody tonight we've had David Sears joining us to tell us about his book, Duel in the Deep, published in 2023. You can check out the Naval Institute Press, their website. Of course, we've got www.duelinthedeep.com scrolling across the bottom. But yeah, if you found this interesting tonight, by all means, check out his book, Duel in the Deep. John had read it, and he really liked it. And it's a fascinating story about the Battle of the Atlantic destroyer versus submarine. So, David, thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And also want to remind everybody, you can also check out the description of this video, and you'll also find a link if you want to check out David's book. All right, David, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to kick you off and, say thank you for your time.
I'm not going to be kicked off. I'm going to leave.
What's up? Okay, got it. You're going to leave. Well, thank you again for joining us. And thank you for your time. All right. Okay. Let's see.
It sounded great. I'm sorry I missed the first 25 minutes or so.
No, you missed the most exciting part.
We had all kinds of technical difficulties. Yeah,
Thanks,
it
Connor.
was
Now I feel you have to watch it.
So, all right. Let's see. Moving on to what's going on with you guys now that springtime's rolling in. Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo Naval Park. And I pulled this picture.
Oh, that's a kind of it. Is this a recent one from this year?
That I pulled that off your Facebook page. I'm assuming all your ice is gone now.
Yes, like in a matter of a day, know. But it was, I say maybe 2 days. Sure. Well, I'm sorry I was late, everyone. We had our St. Patrick's Day fundraiser for the Sullivans. So that was an enjoyable experience. We had about 60 people there. We had corned beef and dinner for dinner, Sullivan's beer from Ireland, who we've partnered with in the past. We're opening March 22nd. I don't know. There's so much going on. We're opening March 22nd.
Only 10 days from now.
Jeez.
Yeah, tell me about it. There's
let me ask you a question. So if you're opening in 10 days, was that previously scheduled, or do you base that on the weather?
No, it's always previous. We're always usually opening the last, whatever turns out to be like the last weekend of March, usually sometime around there. Although this year it might be the 29th, might be the final weekend. But usually in my 7 years there, because today's my 7th anniversary of being at the Naval Park. Thank you. Golf clap. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've always opened up the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, whatever that weekend is of those days. Typically.
And what are you scrambling around doing?
Yeah, we got a lot going on.
No. What are you personally scrambling around doing?
Well, I've got the crew is opening up a couple spaces on the Little Rock for this year, and I'm scrambling around to fill it with artifacts. And so we're opening up the pharmacy, the lab on Little Rock. The crew we have agreed that this year we are going to reopen the Sullivan's Memorial Compartment. It's been closed for about two and a half years. And so we've committed to opening that at some point. I don't think it's going to be ready for the opening, but so then it's me just, the crew does a great job. They paint, they clean, they preserve, and then I've got to go in and kind of do, like research what the room would have looked like, what type of equipment would have been in there, what is available that I can get if we don't have it on board, what can I get to make it a living exhibit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're opening up there's a few spaces that are opening up. So I'm scrambling, if that's the term you'd like to use. I'm scrambling to fill those, to have them available and ready on the tour route. If not, then we just shut the door and I'll work on them through April and then open them then up then. You know what I'm saying? So,
yep. All
so
right.
the memorial compartment is really what I'm focused on, and then the pharmacy space right now.
So the big thing from the Buffalo Naval Park is you guys are going to be open in 10 days.
Yeah.
March 22nd. Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park. Check out their YouTube channel. Simply search for Buffalo Naval Park and their channel will come right up. You can also check out the website, buffalonavalpark.org. And oh yeah, you are. And in a couple of weeks, you might let's see, sometime in April, you might see some videos pop up on their YouTube channel about the USS Kidd with Shane walking underneath under the destroyer USS Kidd.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Don't hurt yourself, Shane.
I thank you.
Don't hit your head.
Thankfully, I'm height challenged, unlike some other people on this chat right now. I don't really have to worry about my head too much.
Yeah, me neither.
It's going to be exciting. Yeah, going down to visit. There's a nice conversation about eating alligator in the chat tonight with Eric. So Tim has said, you're going to try some alligator.
Tastes like chicken.
Did he tell you
already
have to catch it, though?
What was
What's
that?
Did he tell you have to catch the alligator first, though?
Yeah,
Oh, that's no problem. I was just
man.
say uncle.
That's
Right?
not going to happen.
I'll do
All
the
right.
death roll with them.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right, moving on to
Baby
US.
alligators.
Yeah, let's move on.
Mm.
Oh, beautiful. That's a nice shot.
Yeah, John F. Curator, USS Slater out of Albany, New York.
Yeah, we got to
USS
update that photograph. There's no more ice, just like Buffalo. It's been pretty nice weather, 50s, 60s. So we are opening April 2nd. It's always the first Wednesday, of April each season.
Mhm.
So this month is just scrambling, like Shane said, to get the ship cleaned up and ready to go. We're actually at a pretty good point right now. We finish up our major winter projects more or less. So right now it's just a matter of cleaning the ship. So that's what I've been working on quite a bit the past few weeks and going forward, getting everything cleaned up and set up. This past winter, we did accomplish a few things. We got some contractors on the ship to do some repair work up on the flying bridge. We got a little bit of a grant to help us with that. And it's actually going to be a prelude for our 2030 dry dock. We're going to do some more work up there. We restored one and a half magazines in the forward part of the ship. I say that because it's currently set up as a magazine, but in World War II it was just a storage compartment, but it was modified to become a magazine. Today it's just storage, but we have a bunch of training 3-inch rounds down there, so that might be open for viewers to see when they come on the ship. We haven't decided yet. One of our longtime volunteers decided to become a carpenter. He's been teaching himself how to woodwork, so he built us a rifle display this winter. We have some small arms rifles that have just been sitting in storage for 20 years, and they're now going to be on display, so that's really cool. Including the primarily Japanese Arisakas that were surrendered at the end of the war. What else? I'm sure I'm forgetting a few things, but yeah, just getting ready for April 2nd.
Great.
Gotcha.
Oh,
right.
we're looking for interns for a season. If anybody has college age students in the area that want to get paid to give tours and talk about World War II, we're looking for them.
So when you talk about interns, you're literally talking about people that would be giving tours then, correct?
Yep, to help augment our volunteers. plus doing a few other things on the ship. But yeah, we pay you, or if you need college credit, that's an option as well.
Okay.
Connor, do you need college credit?
Although I am signing up with OMA, Ontario Museums Association. I'm going to be taking some courses with them. So I don't think that counts, though. Not for this.
Gotcha. All right. Shane, were you going to say something? I think I cut you off.
No, I was gonna. No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. John Up, curator, USS Slater in Albany. Check out their YouTube channel, USS Slater, in the search bar, or like I said a few moments ago, ussslater.org. All right. And then moving on to museum ships. Of course, Connor gave his presentation at the beginning of our broadcast because we had to get David set up with his connection.
Oh,
Yeah.
Connor, appreciate you doing that. But
Yeah. Shane will just have to go back to the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah.
just watch it.
So where's the Museum Ships Facebook group? Where's it at right now with followers, subscribers?
So we're holding pretty level right now. We did see a bit of a boost with the recent news and the recent event that the USS United States, one of the last passenger liners on Earth, was towed from her home in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, all the way down to Mobile, Alabama. So she's apparently in view of the battleship Alabama right now. So there was a lot of conversation about that, a lot of heated conversation, but it was really fascinating to see people see the vessel. I understand there's been a lot of interest in the ship now that she's been moved, so that's good. But that's kind of been the big adventure.
But that didn't
Other
get
than
you
that,
guys.
so-
That didn't get you guys a lot of new subscribers and followers. I thought it would have.
It got us a few, not as much as the battleship New Jersey being moved last year, but it got us a few more.
Gotcha.
And so right now we're just kind of waiting to see what the big news is. We're starting to see, now that things are getting warmer, we're starting to see more people posting, especially from like the Gulf, as well as starting to creep up to the North Shore of the U.S. And we're starting to see more content. We look forward to seeing all the different posts we're going to see this year from around the world.
All right. Connor Kilgore, administrator, one of the administrators for Museum Ships Facebook group. If you guys haven't already, check out their group on Facebook. It's fascinating. Like you said a few minutes ago, it can be controversial too. You'll get a kick
I got
out
a
of it.
question.
What do you got?
Question. Connor, has there been any talk about, or scuttlebutt, maybe I should say, about
Oh no.
having strip trips at the United States?
I can't speak to that. I'm not part of that operation. So,
What's a strip trip?
as in like ripping parts out of the ship, so for spare parts and stuff for other museums. I wouldn't know.
So you haven't seen that on museum ships? Okay, all right. You won't answer.
I
Okay.
can't say much. I can't say.
Okay, all right.
I also, just a quick aside as well, I highly recommend you visit our website, museumships.us. We have over 500 museum ships cataloged there now, the largest catalog of any museum ship collection from all over the world. Where's the banner?
So it's
it's
museumships.us. Yeah, okay, there we go. All right.
Yeah. So take a look. I highly recommend, if you're planning a trip this year, you're planning to go see some museum ships across North America, Europe, Asia, wherever you are in the world watching this. If you're planning a trip and you want to see museum ships, pay a visit to that website, and you'll see a list of all the different vessels all around the world. We even have an interactive map that you can use to plot your next adventure.
All right. Museumships.us. And I want to say one last round of thanks to David Sears for joining us tonight and telling us about his book, Duel in the Deep. Check out www.duelinthedeep.com if you're interested in getting his book. Let's see. My name is Ken Stano with the YouTube channel History X. Just want to say thank you to everyone for watching tonight. Everyone have a good evening.
Bye.
Whatever.
Not everybody.